Salve omnes! Welcome back to our next video following Aeneid Book 1, the AP syllabus, and going along with the text, the translation, and the notes. Today we are going to be doing lines 167 to 179. And that is the scene right after the storm and Neptune's calming of the winds and the waves, and the Trojans' arrival on a strange foreign shore. And they have no idea where they are. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start off. Remember that the storm has just ended. Neptune has just magically calmed the waves very, very quickly and then flown back up to Mount Olympus, or flown off somewhere. And so now we see the Aeneadae, right? Literally the followers of Aeneas, so the Trojans. And they are defessi. They are extremely tired. And what are they doing? They are contendunt petere. So they are aiming to seek, something like that. They are aiming to seek. They are striving to seek. They are hastening to seek the shore. This is actually the object. Once again, these commas are very unfortunate. This is actually the object of petere. They are seeking the shore, and then we get a relative clause describing the shore, which is closest. There's a sunt missing here. Your note will tell you that. There's a sunt missing here. So they hasten to seek the shore that is closest, cursu. And again, your note goes into some detail here. There's a couple different ways you could understand this. You could understand it to mean something like with speed, because a cursus can be a running, so with speed. Or you can simply understand it to mean the fact that they are sailing, so they set their course for the shore that is closest. So the exhausted Trojans hasten to seek the shore that is closest with their course, and so what happens? They turn to the shores of Libya. So we have just located ourselves. Now it's important to note that we, the reader or the listener to this story, we know where the Trojans are. They themselves do not. All right, continuing on. This bit right here, est in secessu longo locus. Your note tells you that this phrase right here, this introduction begins something called an ekphrasis, or ekphrasis, an ekphrasis. And an ekphrasis is a description of a work of art inside a work of art. So the Aeneid itself is a work of art, and right here we are about to describe another work of art, and that is the locus, the place to which Aeneas and his men have come. So there will be probably a short follow-up video to this one talking about some of the themes behind this episode, but basically what we're talking about here is that this place that Aeneas and the Trojans have come to seems to have something of the divine about it, and we'll see a lot of that in the descriptions. It's so perfect it cannot not be the abode of some deity. So let's start in. Est, whenever est is at the beginning of a sentence like this, we typically understand it to mean something like there is. So it is not a place exists, it is more like there is a place. There is a place in a long, or in this context, deep inlet. All right, so literally a seceding, so the land has fallen back, it's an inlet. And then we find out that an island, an insula, has effecit portum, has made a port. All right, so this is a naturally occurring harbor. No one built it, it's just there. The island has made a port by, okay, this is actually an ablative, all right, by means of the throwing out of its sides. Okay, so basically what this means is that the island is blocking the access, the ocean's access to this inlet, thereby creating essentially a kind of pool. So quibus. Quibus laterum quibus, the sides, so by the throwing out of its sides, by which every wave, notice the distinct hyperbaton here, every wave from the deep is broken, this is a true passive verb, is broken, and, que, breaks itself, or splits itself, something like that, into the drawn back fold. So this is describing, again, the inlet. This sinus reductus is the secessu, it's the inlet. Okay, so the waves are coming in out of the deep, but they get broken up on their way in by the island. which is again breaking up the waves and creating a calm space in this little inlet. So we are now in the inlet, and let's look at what we see. Hink at quink. So literally something like this way and that way, on this side and that side, here and there. Okay, but in two specific places, what do we see? We see vastai rupes. We see vast cliffs and twin rocks. So rupes, cliffs, scopuli, rocks. What do they all do? The cliffs and the rocks, they threaten the sky. Latin says in caelum, they threaten into the sky, but in English we can just understand it. They threaten the sky, so they tower. All right? Don't read too much. I don't think it's necessary to read too much into the use of this verb minantur. Your book makes a big deal in the note about how this verb also has a meaning of to threaten, as if the land itself is somehow threatening to people who come upon it in some way, despite how tranquil and calm and beautiful it is. And that is certainly possible, but at the same time, minantur can simply mean, minor minari, a deponent verb, can simply mean something like to tower over top. And naturally, anything that towers above you is very threatening. Anything that is taller, that has the high ground, is threatening. So in a way, yes, the cliffs and rocks are threatening, but they're also just towering over top. So let's scroll down here a little bit. So we have the cliffs and the rocks, under whose top, so this would be the rocks and the cliffs, under their top, or under their summit, far and wide, this is an adverb, late, far and wide, the safe waters are silent. And this word here, tuta, this word here is very important, very meaningful, because this is the first time that, again, the Trojans, at least since we have seen them, are going to have a moment of safety. All right, these are safe waters. This is literally a safe harbor for the Trojans. Then, so moving on now, we're looking somewhere else. Then a skyna. Okay, a skyna. And this is a scene, like the sort of scene you might have as the backdrop for a play. When you go to see a play, there is a skyna setting the scene. So once again, we have this intimation, just like this whole passage is an ekphrasis, we have this intimation that there's something almost artificial about this, like it's been set up. It's so perfect it couldn't possibly occur in nature. There is a scene with gleaming choruskis, gleaming forests, or a gleaming forest, if you like, up above. Okay, so we can imagine up above on the tops of the cliffs, we have these gleaming forests, and we have a black grove, atrum nemos, a black grove. Here's that same word again, minet, imminent, same stem as minantur. So a black grove threatens with trembling shade, and again the note indicates there's a couple ways for you to take horrenti umbra. You can take it with imminent, if you like, in which case it is an ablative of manner, or you can take it with atrum, so in which case it is a grove that is dark with trembling shade, in which case it's an ablative of cause, right? Because it's dark because of the shade. And this idea horrenti, again, you might read this to understand something like there's something inherently threatening about this space. It's beautiful, but it's treacherous at the same time. But it could also, if you're not inclined that way, this verb horresco, horreo, simply means, not horresco, horreo, simply means to shudder or to tremble. So we can imagine as the breeze wafts through the trees, the leaves tremble, and that makes the shadow they cast also tremble. So we see forests and groves. Let's go down a little bit more here to the end. And then, moving on, underneath the opposite, adversa, the opposite side. So we were looking, remember, there were two, if it's back above, there were two cliffs and rocks. So under the other side, right, so opposite the groves and the forests, all right, we see a cave. There's an S missing, naturally. We see a cave with hanging rocks, okay, so stalactites with hanging rocks. Within, this is the adverb form, but you still see the in, so inside. Within, sunt, there are aquae dulces, so sweet waters for sure, but definitely fresh water as well. So there appears to be some kind of a spring, a natural spring inside this cave where you can get fresh, drinkable water. Remember, we're sailing in from the ocean, we're surrounded by salt water, but this cave has fresh water. And it also has seats, we would say carved from or perhaps in the living rock. And this is the moment right here where we sort of summarize everything. This little phrase right here summarizes everything that has been hinted at so far. Nympharum domus, right? This cave must be the home of nymphs. So again, there is something otherworldly about this place where Aeneas and his men have found themselves, something that puts it not quite in our world, but almost in the world of the gods. So, here, as in this place that we've just found with all of the descriptions that we've read, no chains at all. No chains at all. This non ulla is technically a stylistic device called a tmesis. You can think of it that way because he could have just said nulla, but instead he went non ulla. No chain at all holds the tired ships. And again, your note suggests that you can read fesas naves as personification. The ships themselves are tired. Or you could perhaps read it as a transferred epithet because, of course, it is in fact the Trojans, not their boats, that are tired. It's up to you. No chains needed to hold the ships there because the water is so calm, nor did the anchor grasp, okay, nor did the anchor tie off with its hooked bite. All right, so there's no need for the anchor with its hooked bite. Again, your note points out that this unco morsu is an anachronism because apparently way back in the day, in the time of the Trojan War, they were not actually using hooked anchors. It would have just been more a large weight to keep the ship from floating away. So anchors were not used. This ablative, of course, here is an ablative of means. So this ends the ekphrasis right here. When we move on to the next section, it will not be describing the place anymore, but it will be instead talking about the Trojans and what they do. Okay, so let's continue on then with our Trojans. We continue on hook to this place that we just described, to this otherworldly spot. Aeneas brought, all right, or Aeneas came, and then as we can see here, we have an ablative absolute. And actually this prepositional phrase, omnex numero, goes with the ablative absolute, and septem is with navibus. So Aeneas came to this place with 7 ships gathered from the whole number. And the note explains to you that if when we read on in a little while, we will see that originally Aeneas had set out with 20 ships. So the storm apparently wrecked, or at least drove off 13 of them, and now we just have the 7. And with a great love of the land, this is a genitive. It's actually an objective genitive because the land is what they love, is what they have great love for. With a great love for the land, the Trojans departed from the ships. Okay, they went out, and they gained, or they stepped onto. And this word is interesting. You see in the dictionary that it actually takes an ablative as its object, which is why optata harena has been indicated as the object, even though it is not in the accusative case. That would be optatam harenam. But potiuntur wants an ablative. So the Trojans get out of the ships and step onto, gain, the longed for sand. The root of this word is to pray, the prayed for, longed for sand, right? If you had just been through that storm, you would want the sand too, just anything to get off of the sea. And they place, still the Trojans, they place their limbs caked with salt. Sale is taken with tabernis, okay, as the ablative. Sale is taken with tabernis, an ablative of means, or tabentes. They place their limbs caked with sand upon the shore. So the Trojans have finally made landfall. They've crawled out of the ships and just literally placed their limbs on the sand. They've collapsed onto the ground. They're just that exhausted. All right, moving on here. Now we come to one of the instances where our epic poem provides us with some practical advice. So if you're ever caught in the wild, remember these lines and you will learn how to make a fire. And so first, Ac primum, and so first. Achates, this is Aeneas's right-hand man, Achates strikes forth a spark with flint, okay, or from flint. This is very interesting because this is dative, and the note tells you it is a dative of separation, which is weird because typically we see ablatives of separation, but it almost certainly has something to do with the prefix nature of this verb over here. We've talked before about how prefixed verbs can sometimes in Latin show up with datives. It might also just be a poetical thing because, again, the rules of grammar and poetry are somewhat flexible. So, Achates strikes forth a spark from flint, and he gathers up the fire with leaves. Okay, this is an ablative of means, so not in leaves, but with leaves. All right, he's feeding it. He's feeding it fuel, and he gives, again, the fire at this point. Right, we understand. He gives dry nutriment, so dry tinder, because we're talking about fires all around. So he's building that fire up. He's gone from leaves to small twigs, dry nutriments, and he snatches up the flame, which is different than ignem, which is different than a scintillum. He snatches up the flame in fuel. All right, fomes, dictionary word, not a terribly common word, in the fuel. All right, so basically in these 3 lines, Achates started a fire, naturally. Then our men, now notice, you see, again, all the objects, right? People are doing things, but we just understand who they are, whether it's Achates. Then we come down here to fessi. These are our Trojans. They are not just fessi, they are fessi rerum. They are literally something like tired of things. They're just tired of everything. They're just tired. But the rerum adds just an extra layer of weariness. Your note suggests something, right, again, because we need context really to understand what rerum means. So your note suggests something like weary from their misfortunes or bad luck, right? Tired of everything they have gone through. Okay, they prepare Ceres that has been, or who has been, corrupted by the waves. So the note tells us again we have to know who Ceres is. Ceres is the goddess of grain. Therefore, through the stylistic device of metonymy, this actually means grain. And what has happened to the grain? Well, it has been ruined by the waves. Right? It's been soaked by the waves. But they produce it. They prepare it. They also prepare the arms of Ceres, the weapons of Ceres. Now, Ceres is a goddess of grain, so what could her weapons be? Well, basically this means cooking utensils and whatnot. They prepare those as well. And then they prepare, still preparing, to do 2 things. To torrere, that's the first thing they have to do, to roast literally the fruits, but again, it's Ceres, so we understand grain. The grain rekeptos, that they recovered. Okay, because remember the grain was corrupted by the waves, so they can't use a lot of it, so they had to throw out some of it, but then they found some good grain that was recoverable. They prepared to roast it with flames, obviously, and to break it with a rock. So they're toasting their wheat before they grind it into flour, or barley more likely. Right? They're toasting their barley before they grind it into flour, at which point they will be able to make bread and have dinner. Okay, so that concludes this video, this portion. Our next video will be the final video in this first 200 lines, going through line 209 with a focus on Aeneas and his actions as leader. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Walete.